The torches flickered in the dark chamber, casting restless shadows on the temple walls. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, and the whispers of old priests echoed through the sacred halls. "A prince shall rise," one of them murmured, tracing the ancient hieroglyphs with trembling fingers. "One whose hunger for power will shake the heavens and awaken the forgotten." Outside, the great kingdom of Kemet lay silent under a crimson moon, its people unaware that their fate had already been written. For among them was a prince whose destiny would lead him to the depths of the underworld itself. Prince Zahur stood alone on the palace balcony, watching the city stretch before him. He should have felt pride. He was royalty, born to rule. And yet, in the eyes of his father, he was nothing. His elder brother Seti was the chosen heir, the warrior, the leader. Zahur was merely a shadow, meant to obey, never to command. But that was not enough. His heart burned with an unspoken desire, a hunger for power, for recognition. He had spent years in silence, watching, waiting. But patience had its limits. If the gods would not grant him the throne, he would seek power elsewhere, even if it meant venturing where no mortal dared. In the depths of the forbidden temple, the answer awaited him. And soon, Kemet would kneel not before Seti, not before his father but before him, even if it cost him his soul. The once glorious kingdom of Kemet was slowly withering under the weight of misfortune. The Nile, the lifeblood of the land, had begun to shrink, its waters receding like a frightened beast. The crops withered under the relentless sun, and the whispers of famine grew louder in the streets. At night, the people spoke in hushed tones of an unseen curse. Some blamed the wrath of the gods, angered by the Pharaoh's sins. Others whispered of a shadow lurking beyond the mortal world, growing stronger with each passing day. Inside the grand palace, Pharaoh Kasekem frowned as he listened to his advisors. "The gods test us," they assured him, but their voices wavered with doubt. In the shadows, Prince Zahur listened in silence. He knew the truth. The gods had turned their backs on Kemet, and if the heavens would not save his people, then perhaps another force would. A force far older and far more powerful than any deity that sat upon a golden throne. Zahur clenched his fists as he watched his elder brother Seti train in the courtyard. The clash of bronze swords echoed through the palace, each strike a reminder of his own insignificance. Seti, the golden sun, the warrior prince, the future pharaoh. And what was Zahur? The second-born, the forgotten. He had spent his childhood in the shadows of his father's throne, waiting for a sign that he was worthy. But no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he studied, fought, or strategized, Seti was always ahead. His father's pride, the people's champion. One evening, as the court gathered for a feast, Zahur once again found himself sitting in silence while Seti recounted his latest victory. The laughter of the nobles rang in his ears, their admiration clear. "You should learn from your brother, Zahur," the pharaoh said, his voice heavy with disappointment. The words stung like a blade. Zahur lowered his gaze, but in his heart, something twisted. He would not be ignored forever. One day, they would speak his name with reverence. One day, the throne would be his. And if the gods would not grant it, he would carve his own path no matter the cost. Deep within the palace, hidden behind layers of stone and secrecy, there was a chamber few dared to enter. It was a place of forgotten knowledge, a library of ancient texts that even the priests feared. Zahur had discovered it years ago, guided by curiosity and defiance. The scrolls whispered of lost magic, of gods that had been buried in time. But one name stood out among them all: Neferaya, the goddess of the underworld. She was unlike the other deities of Kemet. While Ra ruled the sky and Osiris judged the dead, Neferaya was something else entirely. She was power incarnate, a force that granted dominion over life and death itself. But those who sought her favor paid a terrible price. Zahur ran his fingers over the faded hieroglyphs, his heart pounding. The text spoke of a ritual, a way to summon the goddess from her eternal slumber. Few had dared before him. None had returned to tell their tale. Yet, as he stood in the dim candlelight, the words burned into his mind. If he could not gain power through the gods of light, then he would turn to the darkness. A storm was coming, and Zahur would be at its center. The night of the blood moon arrived, bathing the sands of Kemet in an eerie red glow. The city lay silent beneath its watchful gaze, but deep within the temple's hidden chamber, something unnatural stirred. Zahur stood at the heart of the sacred space, his hand steady despite the storm raging in his chest. Before him, an ancient altar bore the marks of a forgotten ritual, the symbols carved deep into blackened stone. Around him, torches flickered erratically, their flames bending toward the unseen force gathering in the air. The ritual had been meticulously prepared, offering of rare black lotus, a chalice of his own blood, and the incantations he had memorized from the forbidden texts. He drew the blade across his palm, his breath steady despite the sting. Blood dripped onto the altar, staining the cracked stone. "O Neferaya, goddess of the underworld, hear my call," Zahur intoned, his voice firm despite the cold dread settling in his bones. "I offer my soul as the key to your return. Grant me the power to take what is rightfully mine." A heartbeat of silence. Then a gust of icy wind howled through the chamber, though no doors had opened. The torches flared violently, their flames turning black. Shadows twisted, slithering across the walls, coiling toward the altar like serpents. Then, from the darkness, she emerged. Neferaya stepped forward, her form shifting like mist, flickering between divine beauty and nightmarish horror. Her golden eyes burned with an unnatural glow, her presence both intoxicating and suffocating. Her skin, dark as the abyss, seemed to swallow the light around her. "A mortal dares summon me?" Her voice was a melody of silk and shadows, curling around Zahur like an unseen chain. Zahur forced himself to meet her gaze. "I seek power," he declared. "The throne of Kemet is my birthright, yet the gods favor my brother. I will not accept this fate." Neferaya tilted her head, amusement flickering in her golden eyes. "Power always comes with a price, little prince. Are you willing to pay it?" "I am." A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. "Then the contract is sealed." Dark tendrils slithered toward Zahur, coiling around his wrists, sinking into his skin. A sharp, burning sensation shot through his veins. Unlike anything he had ever felt, both agony and ecstasy, as if his very essence was being rewritten. Visions flooded his mind, armies bowing before him, the Pharaoh gasping for breath as the throne crumbled beneath his feet, his own reflection shifting into something both divine and monstrous. Neferaya leaned in, her breath cold against his skin. "The power you desire is yours," she whispered. "But remember this, Zahur, what is given can always be taken away." Then, with a final gust of wind, she vanished, leaving behind only the scent of decay and the weight of an unseen debt. Zahur stumbled back, his breath ragged. Something had changed within him. He could feel it, the raw, intoxicating power coursing through his body. His time had come. The effects of the pact were immediate. Zahur's body surged with newfound strength, his mind sharper than ever before. In mere days, he bested the greatest warriors in combat, outmaneuvered the pharaoh's wisest counselors, and spoke with a commanding presence that left even the most stubborn nobles in awe. His father began to take notice. At a royal meeting, Zahur challenged the pharaoh's advisors, offering solutions that no one else had considered. His words carried such weight that the court, once dismissive of him, now leaned in with reverence. Even his father, who had always favored Seti, hesitated before dismissing him. Days later, a foreign ambassador, known for his defiance, kneeled before Zahur after mere moments in his presence. The court murmured in astonishment. Forgotten prince was now a force to be reckoned with. Seti, ever the warrior, watched him with suspicion. "Something is different about you," he muttered after a sparring match where Zahur had bested him effortlessly. Zahur only smiled. "Perhaps I have finally embraced my potential." The people whispered his name in admiration, their faith in him growing. But in the temple, the priests watched in fear. Zahur's rise was unnatural, and deep in the underworld, Neferaya smiled. The seeds of darkness had been sown. At first, Kemet flourished under Zahur's influence. Trade increased, the military strengthened, and his father, wary but impressed, began to favor him over Seti. It seemed as though his rise was a blessing. But soon, strange omens plagued the land. The Nile's waters turned murky. The winds carried whispers that had no source. And in the dead of night, shadows stretched unnaturally, moving when no light should have cast them. The pharaoh, growing uneasy, summoned the temple priests. "Something is wrong," he admitted. "Zahur's rise is unnatural." The high priest, his face pale, lowered his voice. "Your Majesty, the prince walks a path that defies the gods. If he continues, our kingdom may suffer consequences beyond mortal understanding." Yet the pharaoh hesitated. Zahur had become indispensable, his brilliance undeniable. Could he truly cast aside the son who had finally proven himself? Meanwhile, Zahur stood in his chamber, staring at his own reflection. His eyes, they were not as they once were. Something was watching him from within, and it was waiting. The air in Zahur's chamber grew thick and cold, the torches flickering wildly as an unnatural force seeped through the walls. A deep chill crawled up his spine, and he knew she had returned. The shadows at the edge of the room coiled and twisted before pooling into a single form. Neferaya emerged from the darkness, her golden eyes gleaming with amusement. "You wear my gifts well, little prince," she purred, stepping forward. "Your people bow before you. Your father hesitates before your growing power. You are on the cusp of taking all that you desire." Zahur straightened, his hands clenched into fists. "I have upheld my end of the pact. I have honored our contract." Neferaya's smile deepened. "Ah, but now it is time for my payment." A heavy weight pressed down on his chest, as though unseen hands were tightening around his soul. Zahur staggered, gasping. A searing pain shot through his veins, and for the first time since gaining her power, he felt helpless. "I gave you everything," she whispered, her voice laced with cruel delight. "Now, I take what is mine." Zahur's vision blurred. The room twisted around him. He had thought himself prepared for this moment, but the grip of the underworld was far stronger than he had imagined. "No," he gritted out. "I won't let you take me." Neferaya laughed softly. "Oh, little prince, you have no choice." But Zahur was not one to surrender easily. If she had come for his soul, then he would fight with everything he had left. Zahur staggered into the palace halls, his breath ragged. The walls seemed to close in around him, the very foundation of the kingdom trembling under unseen forces. The moment Neferaya had returned, darkness had begun to spread. Beyond the palace, the people of Kemet cried out in terror. The skies darkened, the Nile churned as if in agony, and whispers of the underworld slithered through the streets. Inside the throne room, Pharaoh Khsekhem and his court stood frozen as Zahur burst through the grand doors. His skin was pallid, his once commanding presence now overshadowed by the weight of his impending doom. "Zahur?" his father asked, his voice wary. "What is happening?" Zahur's lips parted, but before he could speak, the torches lining the throne room extinguished at once. The air grew unbearably cold, and then she appeared. Neferaya materialized beside Zahur, her golden eyes sweeping across the court like a predator surveying its prey. The nobles fell to their knees in terror. Some collapsed, unable to withstand the suffocating darkness that followed her. The pharaoh's face paled as he took a step back. "By the gods, what have you done?" Zahur's heart pounded in his chest. The realization struck him like a blade as people no longer saw him as a savior. They saw him as a monster. Neferaya turned to him, her gaze filled with dark amusement. "It is time, my prince." But Zahur was not ready to surrender. Not yet. Desperation clawed at Zahur's mind. He had spent years chasing power, believing it would grant him the throne. But now he stood at the edge of oblivion, his people cowering before him, his father looking upon him with fear instead of pride. He would not let Neferaya take everything from him. He turned sharply, his mind racing. There had to be a Waya loophole, a forgotten ritual. The forbidden texts had spoken of Neferaya's power, but they had also hinted at something else, a way to sever the bond. Zahur's gaze snapped to the temple priests, still kneeling in terror. "Tell me," he demanded, "how do I banish her?" The high priest, his hands trembling, stammered. "The contract must be transferred. A soul for a soul." Zahur's breath hitched. "A soul for a soul." Neferaya laughed, reading the thoughts flickering through his mind. "Clever little prince. But who will take your place? His father? His brother? A noble?" His eyes darted across the room, searching until they landed on the one person who had always stood in his way. Seti. Before his brother could react, Zahur lunged. His fingers curled around Seti's throat, and with the last of his strength, he whispered the incantation. A blinding light erupted. A scream tore through the air, and then silence. The throne room was deathly silent. The echoes of Zahur's incantation still lingered in the air, and the torches flickered violently, their flames struggling against the oppressive darkness. Seti lay motionless on the cold stone floor. His once vibrant eyes were dull, his body lifeless. The price had been paid. Zahur staggered back, his breath ragged. His hands trembled as he stared at his brother's body, the weight of his actions crashing down upon him. Neferaya's laughter rang through the chamber, rich with amusement. "Ah, little prince, you truly are ruthless." Zahur's chest rose and fell rapidly. He had done what was necessary. The contract had been fulfilled. Neferaya had taken her soul, but not his. He had won. Or so he thought. A deep, unnatural crack split through the air. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the torches flared a sickly green before vanishing altogether. Zahur's victory was short-lived. Neferaya stepped forward, a satisfied smirk on her lips. "Did you think you could deceive me?" she whispered, her golden eyes glowing with cruel delight. Zahur's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. "You were never meant to rule," she continued. "You were simply the vessel." The shadows twisted, creeping toward him. And then, before he could react, they struck, grasping him, dragging him down. Zahur screamed as the underworld swallowed him whole. The sun rose over Kemet, but its light was dim, shrouded by a veil of unnatural darkness. The people whispered of what had transpired in the Palace Prince's final betrayal, the wrath of the gods, and the horrifying fate that had befallen him. Zahur was gone. No one knew where he had vanished, but the kingdom was left in ruin. The pharaoh, stricken with grief, retreated into isolation. The court was in disarray, and the priests warned that the balance had been disturbed. And in the depths of the underworld, Zahur wandered, trapped between life and death. His voice echoed through the endless abyss, calling out for mercy that would never come. Neferaya's laughter haunted him, a constant reminder that he had been nothing more than a pawn in her grand design. The once ambitious prince, who had sought to defy fate, had instead sealed his own doom. Back in the mortal world, Kemet remained cursed, its future uncertain. The throne stood empty, its rightful heir lost. And in the darkest corners of the land, people whispered of a prince who had bargained with the underworld and paid the ultimate price. His name would be remembered, not as a ruler, but as a warning,